Well, good morning, good afternoon, or evening, wherever you may be in the world. My name is Jamie Swan, and it's really a privilege to be able to welcome you to the Movement Catalyst Spiritual Formation webinar. The Bethany Research Institute is the research arm of Bethany Global University. I lead Bethany's 85 fielded workers and 24 fields around the world, and we're really focused on disciple making and church planting among unreached peoples. Bethany has been on a journey over the past 8 years or so to move from traditional equipping and church planting methods to incorporating more of the principles and practices of movement-oriented disciple making. The Bethany Research Institute was formed to help us in our learning process. Our first original research project focused on the traits and competencies of movement catalysts, and that research was disseminated through a number of articles that were published in Global Missiology, Mission Frontiers, and other periodicals. And today I have the honor of introducing Dr. Daniel Hoskins, who many of you know, and Dr. Paul Hartford, who bring the findings from the latest BRI research focused on the formation journey of movement catalysts. Dr. Daniel Hoskins has served as a missionary and ethnographer whose specialty is qualitative research in Muslim contexts. As a missionary with Run Mission Ministries, he and his family spent 12 years in Central Asia as church planters among unreached Muslim people groups. Dr. Hoskins has been part of Fruitful Practices Research and served as the director of FPR, which is a multi-agency team of missiologists who studied effective ministry in the Muslim world. Their collective efforts led to numerous scholarly articles and 4 books, including Seed to Fruit and Fruit to Harvest, which many of you are familiar with. Dr. Hoskins is an adjunct instructor at Bethany Global University. He holds a doctorate in religious studies from the University of South Africa and an MA in international development from William Terry International University. Dr. Hoskins joined the Bethany Research Institute in December 2021 as the lead qualitative researcher for the Catalyst Formation Research Project. He's the author of the research findings report that we're going to hear about today and the developer of the Catalyst Formation webinar in concert with Dr. Paul Hartford. Dr. Paul Hartford is Bethany Global's training coordinator and has worked in field preparation of global workers for 35 years. In his current position, he consults on training program development with movement-minded partners around the world. He is a former vice president of Bethany Global University. He developed BGU's field training program known as Global Internship and has served as a faculty member since 1994. Paul and his wife, Teresa, served as missionaries with Bethany in disciple making and church planting in the Philippines for 11 years. He holds a doctorate of philosophy in adult and post-secondary education from Capella University and an MA in Intercultural Studies from Wheaton University. And with that, we'll get underway. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Daniel and Paul.
All right, thank you, Jamie. Thank you very much. It's such a privilege to be with all of you today. Allison, can we get, or I don't know, Allison or Paul, can we get our slides back up, slideshow back up, if you will? But I'll get going. Many of you being researchers, since I know a lot of people in the room, you know that this particular project was a qualitative research project. And many of you being researchers know that one of the advantages to qualitative research is it lets you chase some ideas. You're not nailed down to the things that are printed in a survey, but as you talk to people, you can explore things. And that's one of the reasons I love qualitative research. So when we were doing these interviews, we did a lot of exploration, but for that to be successful, you have to have 1 or 2 big picture research questions that keep you anchored to the idea, or you wander around too much, or I would certainly. So our primary research questions, you'll see up here on the slide, were 2. First one, how are the traits and competencies developed that characterize effective movement catalysts? That's building on the traits and competency research that was done in the first round of research Bethany did. We identified the traits and competencies, but now how are they formed? Okay. And then the other research question, what growth pathways of movement catalysts enable them to process these formative factors so that they contribute to the formation of traits and competencies that characterize them? And we'll talk more about that at the when we get into the findings on growth pathways. But those were our primary research questions that shaped and kept us on track as we were doing the interviews. Now, this is a good time for a very important definition. For the purposes of our research, we defined an effective movement catalyst to be a pioneer missionary who has catalyzed the movement with churches that have multiplied to the fourth generation, or discipleship groups that have multiplied to the fourth generation, and that was the first and foremost influential pioneer of that movement. So that's our definition of who an effective catalyst is. If you give me the next slide, please. This graphic gives us a quick picture of the people that we interviewed. You'll see the blue section is global north, global south, and we were very pleased that we ended up having half and half between those two, and that's their region of origin. The center section, you'll see these were we had the predominance were male, 41 male, 6 female, and 3 couples that we interviewed together. And I think that, I don't know, but it seems to me like that probably accurately reflects that the majority of catalysts are male, or at least that we were able to identify from the research they were. And then finally, over in the gray section, you'll see the regions of the world where these movements took place. And you'll see they're scattered, but again, South Asia is the majority of South Asia, again, the most populous part of the world. So that gives you an idea of the pool of people that we did the research with. Now, some of you are familiar with qualitative research, some of you are not, but let me just briefly explain the process. When we study interview transcripts, a researcher marks certain sections of those transcripts for important information that they're saying speaks to the research question. This is what we call coding. Now, if you give me the next slide, in the research, we use codes that came from a very large literature review. We did that at the beginning, and that looked at the development of leaders in the business and industrial world, okay? In fact, we looked at research going back for the last 30 years in major leadership journals. And so from that, we extracted a lot of what we worked with, and one of them was the categories that we work with and how so go to the next slide, please. The categories we worked with are 5 that came out of our literature review. Actually, these were developed by the Center for Leadership Development, or Center for Leadership Studies, I forget what it's called, out in Greensboro. They're one of the leading organizations in that area.
Everything I worked on yesterday says it was never safe.
You'll see here that we've got 5 categories. That's where the stars are. They're challenging assignments, developmental relationships, adverse situations, study and training, and personal experiences. Those were the 5 categories that are used in their studies, and we decided to use them in ours as well. Okay. Next, give me the next slide. And you'll see it. The red line just helps you identify. That's how they appeared, and you'll see that the first 2 appeared in all 50 interviews. Adverse situations appeared in almost all. In other words, they all 5 appeared in almost all interviews. Not exactly all. 3 of them didn't quite meet it. I think they were like 48 or 47. But so that makes it hard to do a lot of the analysis when everything is too much in common for where they appeared. So we did some work and we changed things a little bit. So give us the next slide. And you'll notice the orange bar, or the orange part of it, we're calling dominant. This gives a different picture. What we did was we decided we had a criteria for which factor dominated the person, that particular interview. And in that, you see that challenging assignments dominated the most, but really that challenging assignments and developmental relationships dominated the majority. In fact, those 2 factors together were dominant in 40 out of the 50 interviews that we did. Okay. 80% of the movement catalysts indicated that either challenging assignments or developmental relationships seemed to be from the interviews, were the dominant thing that they talked about in their personal development. Now, think about that and keep that in mind as we go into the rest of the research, that those 2 carry the lion's share of what people talked about in their own personal development. At that point, I'm going to turn it over to Paul and let Paul take over. You're muted, Paul.
I was trying to, yeah, there we go. As Daniel pointed out, these two factors that kind of rose to the surface, challenging assignments, which we're putting as definition here as ministry or NGO assignments that challenge the catalyst and therefore function as a formative factor in their lives. So this category, next slide, Allison, this category has a number of different dimensions to it. And what these assignments may bring out in the person, as we looked at them, was either an increase in supervisory scope so that they were moving upward perhaps within their organization or within the ministry. It gave them an opportunity through these challenging assignments to create change, or it was a ministry role transition, moving to a new role entirely. The results are all the same. Go ahead. The results are all the same. The impact causing the catalyst to learn quickly while actively engaged in ministry and dealing with the pressures of leadership, which Daniel notes as an important qualifier. So that, in other words, the idea of challenging assignments is what we probably often call as learning in context or learning to learn from the context, where the context itself becomes formative in the life of the ministry direction of the learner. So where the challenge comes from is important. As compared to other sectors like business, catalysts are less likely to receive challenging assignments from others and more likely to point to that challenging assignment being from God. That they see God as having placed them in a situation, as giving them the challenge. Or in some cases, it was also a challenge that they set for themselves, a little bit more self-directed. So in a way, that's not surprising, in keeping with the DNA of Movement Catalyst, that we see people who've learned to respond in faith and obedience to what God's telling them to do. And so the challenges fall into those categories. The challenges are many. There's a general category that was just a lot of different things that didn't move up significantly, but were noted, quite a wide range. But the ones that stood out and clustered as significant, discovery, yes, stands out as significant. That makes sense. As followers of Jesus, we often find ourselves in a place where we're surprised by what God has given us and find it that has reshaped our life through that. My own testimony is like this. I used to fear public speaking. I'm still sometimes nervous, but when I started leading small group Bible studies, it was like I came home. It was like I knew where I was and I knew where I belonged. So that sense that God had given me something that I didn't know I had. Startup ministries was another significant challenging assignment mentioned, where people were given an opportunity or told to start something new. The step of faith, where they entered into something where they knew they couldn't do it alone, but mentioned that, they realized they had to depend on God for what they were doing and step out in faith. A lot of people also mentioned a pre-field church related assignment, something maybe in their youth or early days in ministry before they were sent to the field, before they moved into church planting, where they had some sort of an assignment within their church that gave them that sense of challenge that brought them to transformation and set them on a course of where they ended up. Short-term trips was another one that was mentioned and by several, and we know that that's probably one of the primary benefits of short-term trips, because it can provide for a young person a challenge, a step out of their comfort zone, sometimes a step up in faith as well. And then one that stands out here and was mentioned by several, but relates to this next section that Daniel's going to talk about, is learning from locals. That people mentioned the challenging assignments that were transformative in their lives were where they had to look to and depend on local people, believers and that presented a challenge that caused transformation and growth in their lives. So Daniel, look at the developmental relationships. And you're muted.
Yeah, it's crazy how you always forget to turn the mic on. Developmental relationships are those relationships or encounters with people in our lives who develop in our gifts and skill set that carry the catalyst forward in moving in the direction either before they started ministry with movements or after they've already been on the field and are moving in that direction. Okay. Now I want to go to the next slide and I want to look at, here's the list of how that breaks down. It broke down into mentors. These were the kinds of developmental relationships that people talked about. Mentors, relationships with colleagues, relationships with local believers. And I'll go into this in a little more depth in a moment. Disciplers, encouragers, authorities, and so that's referring to authority figures in their life, their ministry, and coaches. And so I think that list is good to keep in mind, but I want to go to the next one and take that list and turn it into a word cloud. Okay, you're probably all familiar with word clouds. The relative size of the words is in relationship to how often they occurred. And I added the numbers there just so you get a sense of how often they occur. Okay, word clouds aren't meant to be scientific. They're meant to be a visual way of catching a sense of relative importance or relative mentions in the interviews. Okay, there's many things we could talk about here, but two insights from this section, developmental relationships, that I found particularly interesting that I'd like to go into. First, let's talk about what we've called developmental relationships of two different kinds. There we go, really. Developmental relationships with colleagues and developmental relationships with locals. This is a really interesting one. Those of you that have been on the field or have been involved in a movement will understand what I'm talking about, how that line gets really funny. It starts out with most workers have colleagues or part of their organization. They're maybe from their own home country or they're certainly from a similar background, okay? But as they invest themselves and as they pour their life in there, they build stronger and stronger relationships with locals that begin to have an impact on their own spiritual and their own journey as a movement catalyst. And then that line begins to blur. You start seeing that there's no difference in the interview, no difference in the person's mind between the locals that were part of their life and the colleagues. They had moved into a category where they were the same. I know in my own experiences on the field, I learned the most. I learned a lot from people on my team, had some great team members that were from my background, okay, from the West. But then as time went on, more and more of my own experience was I was spending more time with locals and more they were shaping me. And that's kind of the type of thing that we see in a lot of interviews, is that starts out with the colleagues are foreign expatriate, like or of the same background as the person we interviewed, and then eventually the relationship with locals comes into that and they become almost blended, where there's no difference. You can't tell the difference between the two. Now let's go to the second one that I thought was important from this. Let's go to the next slide, and that's mentors and coaches. This pair of developmental relationships is, I think, very interesting, because those terms are sometimes used synonymously. I want to recognize that it's not always completely sure that you can delineate those. However, we tried our best to, and we tried to keep them apart. And in analyzing the interviews, we tried to keep them very separate. But in the interview analysis, really, we had to base it on the word that the person was using or the context around that word. So I want to explain how we intended it and how we understand these words. And that is, for mentors, in a mentoring relationship, the source of knowledge is the mentor, and they're sharing knowledge. That's the main action that's taking place, is that knowledge is going from the mentor to the person they're mentoring. so they're focused on sharing the accumulated knowledge and experience that they have. It's similar to teaching, but it's much more personal. But then in coaching, it's the opposite. The knowledge is resident in the person being coached, and it's being drawn out of them. A lot of coaching is helping a skilled person improve on what they already do. So what's important here is in our analysis of the interviews, much more of the time, Catalyst spoke of mentors and their impact on their life, people who shared their knowledge with them much more often than they talked about the coaches in their life. You can see the relative difference here. In fact, you see here in 98% of the interviews, some were mentioned mentors in their life, whereas only 30% of interviews mentioned coaches. Okay. That I find is interesting, and it helps us think about the fact that it was kind of surprising to me because I really expected it to be the opposite from my own experience. And so it helped me think about where the time investment is maybe most important. And mentors are ones generally we have earlier in our experience when we're developing. And maybe that's the more important investment, whereas coaches come alongside us later. I think that's enough for right now. I want us to go to take a break and do some Q&A, and I'm also going to try to throw a poll up for us to do during the question and answer session. But let me turn it over to Paul for that.
Yeah, so feel free to unmute. I know there's about 25 of us online right now. But if you want to take advantage of this time and either ask a question, or here's a couple of prods that we can look at. How can we best take advantage of the formative potential of challenging assignments, looking at what we've just discussed? And then how can we develop organizational culture and training which encourages a mindset towards mutually developmental relationships, especially those with locals? So I don't know if anyone has any comments on that, on either one of those questions. Feel free to jump in.
Jim Haney has a comment.
Okay, let me put my hand down real quick. And yeah, I have a question on challenging assignments. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
To me, one of the big things in ministry is separating the, beyond challenging assignments, separating the challenges that God has placed. And sometimes the more apparent assignments that present themselves to a team or team member. For example, you get so many challenges coming from different directions, discerning and diagnosing which challenges are presented by God and which challenges are distractions. For example, one of the challenges that I recognized coming from God in my ministry as a church planter was maintaining my presence when it seemed that maybe I had lost my voice or had not yet gained a voice. And then there's all these assumed challenges that I pick up along the way that are kind of like things that just jump on my back. Gatekeepers, extra biblical standards for what it means to be a church or a disciple, organizational structures, teams, and even meetings. One of the things we found about strategy coordinators, that good strategy coordinators oftentimes are the ones that don't appear in meetings. They don't come to meetings. They don't like to be in meetings because they like to be working there. So sometimes the challenging assignments, sometimes we think the assignment is the meeting, or the assignment is, buying land or buying money for church property so we can put up chapels and land and send people to seminaries, and so they can all get their MDiv degrees and all these sorts of things. We've all had to take those organizational barriers on. So I guess the point I'm trying to clarify here is, how do you distinguish between a challenging assignment is the challenge is coming from God, and then all the other challenges that you're faced with that are really just distractions?
Well, really tough question for us. It really comes down to the way we coded the interviews, and when a person linked their development to an assignment, that they grew through an assignment, that they stretched, that there were disappointment that they had to wrestle through because of an assignment. We marked it as a challenging assignment. As far as determining where it came from, that's another really hard one. We didn't put a lot of focus there, and I probably could go back and look at the interviews again and try to come up with a better answer. I just know that when coding the interviews, we were just trying to identify which of these challenging, was it a challenging assignment and where did it seem to be coming from? We did 2 rounds of coding to try to identify that. But again, that was our perception of it, as opposed to, yeah.
Let me just follow up really quick and just say that if you go back through the interviews and you look at challenging assignments, can you look for things that you would either call a bleeder to the movement? A bleeder, in other words, it bleeds off energy from the movement because there are places where a team is stuck, creating resistance within the circuit. Can you go back and look at some of those? I would be interested to know from the interviews, what were some of the things that people had to wrestle through to get to the place where they could actually engage their challenging assignment? It seems to me there's so many of those extra assignment challenges and barriers and structures that many people really never get to their assignment.
Well, in this case, they all got to the assignment because they all eventually were effective catalysts. But that would be interesting to look at. It would take a whole nother have to dive back into the coding. But Jim, thank you. That was a good question. Who's next?
I think Ryan.
Guillermo?
Ryan had your hand.
Oh, Ryan, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to give a comment on the first question. My experience was the greatest breakthrough came when someone helped me to embrace a growth mindset, that whatever challenging circumstance came, it wasn't about my value or me being successful. It presented an opportunity for me to grow in my character, my resilience, and in my competency. And it just freed me up to have an attitude of like, here comes another massive difficulty that we didn't anticipate, and it may take up 3 months of our time.
Yeah.
I'm determined to learn everything I can from it, pick up new skills, stay positive, and grow in my character through this, and it will be useful. And so that someone helped me to do that, and so we try to give that to people.
Great.
That's wonderful. Go ahead, Dan and Karen.
Yeah. Thank you, Daniel. Excuse me, sorry. Just want to go to the question regarding the mentors versus coaches, and I know in the pre-review, Daniel, I had asked a question, and I appreciate you addressing that. Part of it, I still want to know in how the fact that mentor is a term that has been long familiar, and has been understood for a very, very long time, all the way back to Paul and Timothy. The idea of a coach is a newer concept. And that not as many people have access to what we would classically define as a coach, or may not even have been familiar with a coach in that time. How do you think that difference of familiarity of the terms or the access to those types, two very distinct roles, plays out into this, versus in terms of access to a coach versus impact of a coach? Out on this?
That's a great question. I don't know that I can say I don't know if the data would give me an answer either way, but I know I didn't look for that. Okay. So I can't answer, but it's a great question. It's a great question.
Very good. Thank you.
Karen.
Okay, I have first I just follow up on the challenging assignments. As far as I can tell, I think a challenging assignment is when the rug gets pulled out from under you and you suddenly are dependent on God. And you thought you were doing this like you were somebody's assistant, and then the somebody vanishes. In my case, the somebody had a heart attack and flew back across the ocean before I ever got there. And so I was suddenly in charge of this project. And so that's, and then in the catalyst that I'm coaching or mentoring, whatever, I'm not sure what she would call me. Anyway, she also had the rug pulled out from under her. And I think that's where she really grew, when she had to be completely dependent on God. That's just my comment there. My question, and the reason I raised my hand in the first place was, I think you mentioned it in your, in the document you sent us, but I'd like you to be more clear about, for the global South people, who to them was a colleague and who to them is a local.
Yeah.
For global South, because you've mentioned it in the context of global North people who cross an ocean or something.
Right.
What is the definition?
To give you an example, remember one of the people we interviewed, they were from the Indian subcontinent. They moved from one part of the subcontinent, and I can't remember the dynamics, but they moved to another part of the subcontinent, and I don't remember why they moved with it, but for whatever reason they moved to begin ministry up there. And so while they were in the same country, okay, they were still working with the people very different from themselves, and they very quickly had to start drawing their ideas and their support in many ways from the people who were there that they were there to work with, not from their sending agency or from even expatriates that they were friends with back in the capital city or wherever they came from. I don't remember. But so in cases when it was, I'll give you another example. One young man was in Central Asia, and he started out relating to people in this organization that were very international organization, but you could tell his ideas, his support, everything was being drawn from people within that organization that might be from England, they might be from Australia, they might be from wherever. But then the line crossed, and eventually he had this group of men around him that were all MBBs like he was, and he started drawing, they became the people he drew from. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So a colleague is somebody who is like you originally, and a local is the people you've gone to minister to, or the people you're ministering.
Yeah, more or less. It was a little,
Right?
Sometimes it was a funny line. Like if a guy's in his own same country and he's moved from one part to another. But sometimes it was organizational, sometimes it was ethnic shift. But yeah.
One of the key issues in movements is that people who start something among their local ethnic group frequently find out that God has bigger plans, and pretty soon they're in 6 ethnic groups or 4 different provinces or 5 different islands, and by definition they don't have any colleagues in those places, and they do have to learn and adapt and keep localizing what they're doing. That's true of at least 18 of 24 catalysts that we regularly interact with. So yeah, this is not a small problem.
Let's take one more question in this before we move on. Shannon?
Yeah, thank you. Shannon Batchelor, working mainly in the Middle East, walking alongside about 18 different movement catalysts. And one of the things we've seen is that movements often start among marginalized or oppressed people groups, refugees, minority peoples. We've seen it among Syrians and Palestinians, Iranians and Kurds. So I'm wondering, with the challenge, all those are challenging assignments because the people themselves are suffering in some form or fashion and looking for something to transform their situation, their lives, and they turn to Christ. So what I'm wondering is there any tie here between the people group that the movement starts among and the challenging situation that they're in, and connecting that with the challenging assignment of the particular catalyst?
Nothing that we identified. We'd have to go back and take a look and see if that ever turned up. But to be honest, just thinking, I don't know that would be something that we could really speak to because we didn't look for that. Does that make sense? And I know it didn't come up spontaneously in a lot of the interviews. It might have come up in some. I did personally. I did 47 of the 50 interviews, or I think 46. Yeah, I don't know that we can speak to that issue with the data we have.
Okay.
Good question.
Yeah, and it's an interesting kind of transition into our next section. So let's go ahead and move on. The next finding in the study was related to challenging assignments, and maybe in some ways similar, and sometimes maybe a little bleed over, and that's adverse situations. So we're going to define adverse situations as situations which unexpectedly occur in ministry challenge that challenge the catalyst. So some of the comments that were just made, I think Karen was one who said something about this, that these are situations which come up unexpectedly, come up with a situation that's just really not preventable, but that launches people forward. Paul's words in Philippians 4 come to mind here, where he says, I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. So that idea of the secret of being content in every situation is echoed in this study. The study mentions that I think it raises the question, since no one would ever intentionally inflict such hardships on those they're preparing and equipping, of what practical use is this aspect of findings? So without question, all missionaries face adversity. However, not all of them grow and learn from it. I think that's the point we have to focus on. The difference with challenging assignments and adversity is that adversity is not something we would intentionally inflict on anyone, where challenging assignments are things we might put in front of somebody. We can't predict necessarily the adversity. We can't prevent all of it. And so really, when it comes to preparing people to be movement catalysts, we have to rely heavily on preparing them ahead of time to face such adversity. So some of the situations of adversity that are mentioned next, problems with other Christians, persecution and opposition, pretty obvious. And I think that relates, Shannon, to maybe to your question a little bit of where people are facing that kind of opposition. I think that was you who asked that question. And then situation where there's just financial adversity. Things aren't going well financially, or people face an actual failure in their work. Living conditions can be a type of adversity, and sickness and injuries can be a type of adversity as well. So all these things are pressing in on people, but even though they're adverse situations, the participants talked about these as being transformative in shaping who they are in ministry. Next slide. Particularly mentioned in the study, problems with other Christians were mentioned as often as persecution and opposition from the community, but even were more dominant in some ways. And I think there's a lot of things happening there. You have the traditional idea that a lot of the reason people leave the field is because of problems with coworkers. But I think this also related to opposition from or hostility from traditional churches or approaches. So you have, movement catalysts moving in a different way than the traditional ministry. And therefore, I think we even see it in the dialogue sometimes about movements, opposition from within the church as to whether this is viable, whether this is the right way to go, or even slander concerning their work. And so that kind of putting a target on your back by moving out into a different stream of ministry than traditional ministry, I think is probably is a factor in this. You have other reasons that maybe they face problems with other Christians, but I think it raises the question that training and dealing with such the opposition is probably important in preparing people for ministry, as well as creating a good sense of understanding of a theology of suffering to face the kind of persecution and opposition they may face. There was a difference between for the last three categories. Go on to the next one, Allison. These three factors, financial stress, failure, and living conditions, had an interesting significance and difference between those who came from the global north and those who came from the global south. So that those who came from the global south mentioned more often financial stress, or it was more significant for them, failure and living conditions. And the fact that these were more significant for those from the global south suggests that these insecurities are probably a greater concern for that they had, perhaps maybe the fact that they have less control or less opportunity for control over these factors. But it should be something we should be thinking about in preparing those from those contexts, or at least in setting expectations and for the catalysts and for their senders. Daniel, go ahead. And unmute.
Sorry about that. Always forget. We're going to talk about the category of study and training. Formative factors that arise from various kinds of educational experiences. So, although study and training came up in most of the interviews, all but I think 3, it wasn't very dominant. Let's go to the next slide. So here you see how we broke it down. You see that field training, university or college, and personal reading were turned up in a lot of interviews. Turned up in almost 35. So the majority of interviews, these all turned up in. Lifelong learning was a category that I wasn't surprised, but it was in a lot of the interviews as well. And then church training did impact some people, but it just wasn't nearly as common. You see here that these 3 here were the main influence when it comes to training. Now, when we talk about personal reading, what we really are talking about is self-directed learning. Catalysts who wanted to learn more about, say, history of mission, and so they started reading bibliographies. Okay, someone who was interested in theological development in other similar settings to theirs, they did reading about that. Okay, university or college, of course, we're talking about formal secondary education, and then field-based. This is formal or semi-formal, but usually it was always mission, field-based, mission-specific training. Now, if we press a little deeper, we find something interesting in this that I want to look at, and that's the differences of answers between the catalysts in the global north and global south. And this was one of those things that in the research, in not every case, but in a number of cases, the difference between those two, I think, was insightful. Okay, so here we see. Well, I'm sorry. So, can you guys see the slide? Okay, mine screen is okay. So you see that field training. Well, I don't know what that is. That the formative factor of field training, I think this is really interesting here, was mentioned in about the same number of interviewed by about the same number of catalysts in the north and the south. Okay, global north, global south. But when you talk about its dominance, it was much more dominant. It was dominant in almost half of the interviews that we did with global south catalysts, as opposed to only a small number of those from the global north. Now, exactly what that means, it's hard to know, but certainly field training had a large impact on those from the global south, perhaps a larger impact. And I think that's something important to think about as we plan training in the field. Let's go to the next one. Okay. Here we see that, again, we're talking about the difference between global north, global south. The formal education, keep getting notifications popping up. Sorry, I gotta get them out of the way. Formal education and then more self-directed education. You can see the difference. In both cases, global north, it was of more influence or more commonly mentioned by people in the global north than in the global south. Could this be the reason? I tried to think about why this might be. For example, could it be with personal reading? Could it be the opportunities available to those in the global south for good reading material related to mission as opposed to what's available to those in the global north? Or could it be just simply a culture of reading and self-study is more prevalent? And again, let me get some of this stuff off of here. And as one person just commented, more resources available in English for reading about movements and about mission in general available to people from the north than the south. But certainly there's a difference here, and that's something I think we need to be aware of. Let's see. Let's tell you what, at that point,
Yeah,
I think it's a good time to, are we going to do another another time of question and answer here or comments here?
Yeah, let's do that. And I think the comment that Karen posted, I think, Allison, go to the next slide with the questions. I put the question here, what are some of the challenges to harnessing adversities as a developmental growth tool? Sorry. And Karen, you mentioned the idea of actually using adversity in terms of hostile religious environments, militancy. Actually, placing people in those is actually using adversity very intentionally. So I don't know if you wanted to comment more on that. You can read that comment there.
I think that's enough.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. And then any other comments on either of these questions? How do we challenge, how do we harness adversities as a growth tool? And then the second question here, while field training, formal training, and personal reading seem to have equal weight, the difference of these between the global and north and south was significant. How might that influence our approach to training? So see who has their hand up here.
Dan Germo.
Yeah, Dan, you have a question there.
Yeah, I put it up and pulled it back down, but I'll go ahead and ask. I'm formulating the question here. Just on that second point on the field training and the difference between the global north and global south, I'm processing how much of the difference is, again, the impact of it versus the availability of it. When you look at Global North, well, Bethany Global University, we had a field training aspect that was a year and a half significant part. Most don't have that, and so the availability of being trained in the field probably much lower for the Westerner. Where like I know in Kenya, we trained missionaries for many years, and because of our proximity to the unreached, field training in context training was a significant portion of their training. Much easier, and even be going back and forth in that process. So I'm wondering how much of difference there is the preference of the northern global north versus global south versus the availability of it to each of those sectors. I don't know if that could have even been reflected in the data, but that's I'm processing that through just as I'm reading it here.
Well, I thought of the same thing when I was doing the analysis. How much of this was just the way we do things? How much of it was preference? How much of it was their availability? There's so many issues. I think the takeaway for me was looking at that if in fact field training is really being a high value for catalysts from the global south, maybe we need to make sure that global north people from the global north that are entering into movement ministry are given access, or make sure they're getting field training more often, because I think for whatever reason our structure is not oriented toward that. It's oriented toward giving them training before.
Yeah, and on that, I fully agree. And of course, we are very much focused on field training as a difference. I'm wondering if there'd been more access even for the Northerners to having field training themselves, would that number have been higher? That was actually but there's no way to really know that.
Yeah, no way to know from the data.
Yeah.
Good question. One of those ponderables in this. Anyone else?
Matt Harber's posted a question here. Where there's a lack of formal education and personal reading, was there a consideration of orality-based cultures being prevalent in the global South?
No, that's a really good one. No, I did not ask any questions about orality. That's a really good one, and would have been, I'm pretty certain, just thinking back over the interviews, just, remembering, I'm pretty sure at least a few, probably at least 2 or 3 or 4 of the guys I interviewed would have been in that, definitely in the category of being oral learners at the very least. And I'm sure probably more just guessing where they're from, but I'm just thinking of people, the way they interacted, they were not really functioning in the literary world a lot. If that helps.
Okay.
Jim had a question here. I'm trying to find it. I'm not navigating around here. Can you find it, Paul? Because I can't find that one.
The question. Well, Mary has her hand up, so we'll go ahead. Mary, you go ahead and do that. We'll see what else we find here.
I'm sorry, did you just invite me to?
Yeah, you have your, go ahead, okay. Mary.
Okay, yeah, no, I was just saying, because so many things are in English originally, translating them as much as they, they apply to a global South cultures and perspectives. I mean, if you're talking global North, it might be that they don't necessarily translate well into how a global South person might minister or need to be encouraged. But things like Didasco, which does some automatic translation, it does some into multiple languages, helps get some of those training and even certificates for the training, so that which seems to be more appreciated by global South workers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Jim had posted, it's because when we go, we assume we are going as trainers rather than to be trained. When I started planting churches in Nigeria in 1981, a local believer said, Jim, either you will change or Nigerians will change, and Nigerians aren't going to change. Wonderful. So true. Any other comments or questions here on this part?
Looks like Mary's got her hand up again. Mary, was it a separate question?
Okay.
No. Okay.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and move on then. Personal experiences. This particular last section, there was a lot of different factors, but here the definition: formative factors that arise from impactful experience and the inner processes of maturing, distinguished from experiences in the context of ministry. So a lot of statements made as things that were formative in people's lives in preparing them that came out of just ordinary personal experiences and the natural maturing processes. A lot of different factors were covered in this, ranging from sports involvement, music lessons, ordinary experience of life, both positive and negative, statistical information that they viewed, things that they learned along the way. And I think what it really shows is that God uses a myriad of ways to form each one of us very individually, very distinctly. No two of us are alike, and we come to the work that God has called us to do. We come to it with a huge range of previous experience that has particularly shaped us. And so the people interviewed were acknowledging all those different personal experiences, but again, they weren't statistically useful to categorize them and do the same kind of analysis as was done on the other factors. There is a note here, though, that we should point out. One factor that stood out as significant, and Allison, go ahead with the next slide, is that personal experiences that involve the catalyst in some way acting in obedience to their sense of the will of God were mentioned in almost half of the interviews. From this, we would say that a plethora of personal experiences help to form a catalyst, the most important ones being those that push them to obey the Lord. This tells us that obedience-based discipleship means much more than a philosophy of ministry for catalysts. It forms a part of their personal DNA. I think that's a really important statement to point out. So all of that leads us back to the second part of the study, or the second point of the study, which was growth pathways. And I'll turn it back over to Daniel for that.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So the second question, the second research question was, what responses or pathways of growth pathways, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out exactly how to term it. What growth pathways enable movement catalysts to process these formative factors so they contribute to their formation of the characteristics and competencies that they demonstrate? So what mechanisms would be another way of putting it, but we chose growth pathways because it was more than just a mechanism. It was like a path that they're walking on, that through that path they're processing what they're going through, the factors that they're experiencing. So this concept, growth pathways, is a new term. As far as I know, no one's ever used it, but we came up with it to try to capture this idea. I distinctly remember the team meeting when we wrestled over it and hammered out. We had several different possibilities, but we call them the cognitive, affective, and behavioral dispositions that enable a person to learn and grow from their experience. Okay, the things about them, the cognitive, affective, and behavioral dispositions, we called it, that enable a person to learn and grow from their experience. Simple fact is, I think all of us know this, not everyone learns from experience. Some people just, they go through things, it seems like they have to go around that tree over and over again. Not everyone learns from experience. On the other hand, some people learn from experience and immediately find it as a growth opportunity. And these are things that are built up in someone over time, they develop. And so the pathways are ways that they process this fundamental belief, or they develop, I would say, the fundamental belief that the capacities and talents of a person can be developed and enhanced over time through effort. There are many possibilities we heard about in the interviews, many different possible growth pathways. In the end, there were just 5 of them that really were significant enough for us to include in the research report. And that's these 5 here, led by the Spirit. And by that we mean when the catalyst displays dependence on constantly hearing the voice of God for direction and ministry. Okay. Scripture. By that we mean when the Bible is clearly the prime shaping factor of the growth of the catalyst and their way of understanding their mission, their calling. Okay. Reflective practice. By that we mean when a catalyst is marked by times when they carefully reflect, consider their actions and the responses to their actions and the results of their actions, and then make adjustments accordingly. Openness to experience. When a catalyst demonstrates an open mind and an expectation that there's something new they can learn in all situations. And then one that we're calling a sanctified locus of control. And that is when the catalyst expresses a heart, like we find in a quote from St. Ignatius of Loyola, who said, pray as though everything depended on God, act as though everything depended on you. Okay, that's what we're talking about when we talk about a sanctified locus of control. That the control in them isn't just, I have internal locus of control, but that locus of control is sanctified by the Holy Spirit. It's not just me acting, it's God acting, but it's both of us acting. Okay. Here's some examples for the led by the Spirit one from a quote from a catalyst in Southeast Asia. Listening to God is very important if you're working in this kind of ministry. If you've not attuned how God communicates, then it's harder to do it. And so many times in our ministry, we've gone back to assessing, Are we hearing God accurately? What is God telling us? And are we clear on what it is? Or another one, an African brother put it this way, I liked it, talking about the scripture being a primary pathway. He said, we go out and plant churches because we're learning from the Apostle Paul. Paul has been like a mentor to me. I'm a prolific reader of books and the epistles that Paul wrote. And one of the qualities of Paul was that he's a man who empowers others. I really take that as an intentional form of ministry. I really want to empower. And so that it becomes part of my DNA right from reading the Apostle Paul. I could go on, but those are just a few quotations to help you understand what we were drawing from when we developed these growth pathways. Now, go to the next one. All 5 of these pathways passed the test for being valid, which, and that is that they occurred in at least 1/3 of the interviews. Okay. And you see that number there, 46, 41, 33, 27, and 19. Okay. But what's interesting is when you look at the dominance factor, that they occurred in enough interviews to be considered dominant. And you look at the, let's see, go to the next slide, I think is where I've got it marked out. Yeah. There you see, look at the dominance. Led by the Holy Spirit, dominated 23 of the interviews. Scripture dominated 10 of them, reflective practice 8, openness to experience 5, sanctified locus of control did not dominate any of them. I was surprised by this kind of balance here. One thing I think that isn't reflected in this, and I don't know how I would show it graphically, but led by the Spirit in Scripture often overlapped. In fact, in dominance, it only had to turn up 1/3 of the time, be 1/3 of the factors. Sometimes they were both in there as a third, so there was 2 of them together. Led by the Spirit in Scripture often went together. As one person put it, I thought I had a quote here, but I don't. As it concerns these growth pathways, these 3 pathways, particularly led by the Spirit, Scripture, and reflective practice. Give me the next slide. Those 3 were 78% of the interviews were dominated by one of the 3. I thought that was fascinating. Those 3 made up the vast majority of what dominated the pathway study, part of the study that related to pathways. Okay, and again, they often combine, so the numbers aren't going to all add up to 100. Okay, because they sometimes or add up to 50 rather in this case. The point is, these different pathways. Can I give a definition of reflective practice again? Yeah, let me go back and read that when someone asks. Find it here. Now, my computer is not wanting to. It's slowing down for some. Let's see. Let me just a moment. Okay. Well, I have it.
Got it here. When a catalyst is marked by times when they carefully consider their actions and adjust accordingly.
Yes, thank you very much. For some reason, mine's acting up here. Yes, okay. Now I think, did we want to do one more Q&A time right here, Paul?
We do have time for it. So
I'm sorry for the interruption to the audio, folks. It's a little bit funky right now.
Well, thank you, Daniel. So here's a couple of questions we could consider. How can we encourage obedience-based discipleship to become a personal ethos and life way of potential catalysts, not just a philosophy of ministry, as we're raising up the next generation? And then looking to this next section that Daniel just finished, the research sought to understand which how what enables catalysts to process the formative factors that we've been discussing. Do you find the concept of pathways of growth useful, and does it fit with your own observations in ministry? So the pathways being the way in which people take the factors, the formative factors, and actually process them. So any comments or questions or other questions related to what we've just shared? You can either mark your hand raised or just jump right in.
I found it interesting that the reflective practice was third, being on that list, which to me suggests maybe not as much purposeful uh, direction in that sense as maybe I would expect or would like to see.
Mhm. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I know that we often say experience is a great teacher, but the reality is it's not experience as a great teacher. It's reflection on experience that makes it a learning opportunity. So.
I think that obedience-based discipleship. Oh, sorry, you want to go ahead?
Go ahead, Carol. You said.
Obedience-based discipleship to become a personal ethos and life way of potential catalysts. It has to be applied to when you're reading scripture and you're reflecting on it in your discovery groups. It needs to apply to all areas of your life. Surely God is speaking to me personally about how I am treating, say, my spouse, as well as how I talk with maybe the new stranger I meet down the block, and think of them as, are they a ministry opportunity to me? So getting accountability, writing down what people say, this is what God has showed me, and this is what I intend to do about it specifically this week. And then the next week, those who heard that statement, I will statement that they ask, so how did that go for you? Not to judge them, but to come alongside, knowing that they will also be asked the same question. So in that way, the Word of God always speaks to us personally as well as ministry. I don't know that God makes a difference, differentiates on it. And so getting the accountability, knowing that it's coming in the next week is a big factor in my life.
Thank you, Carol. Yeah. Renata.
Yes, thank you. Just following up with that question. Brother Ryan just wrote it, but I wanted to mention that I think one way to encourage this obedience-based discipleship is just helping them, encouraging us or them to do it in their lives, and not only being a DBS leader or facilitator. You have to answer also the questions, and not only facilitating it and paying attention on what the others are answering, but what you are answering, what we are obeying God. And also being a mentor or a coach, we can ask them this question: how are you going to obey this in your life? And helping them to be accountable for their personal life and family, etc. So just helping them to practice it.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I would go right along with that and say that as you are anyone who's facilitating a discovery group or DBS, you don't just ask them how they're doing it. You give an example from yourself, how last week you put it into practice. That's modeling, instead of saying, okay, how you're all doing to obey me? No, it's how are we all doing to obey our Lord? And that is huge. As facilitators, we need to be doing it ourselves and not just say, I used to do it. I did it this week. Thank you, Renata. I really like that.
Stephen posted, Stefan, would it be helpful to put together some questions to debrief the Catalyst experience and help further reflections, maybe connected with scripture potential coaching? So good suggestion. Any thoughts on that? If not, I did see a hand raised. Glenn, was it you?
Yeah, I think the ladies covered it, but I would say that the practical application of whatever methodology you're using needs to be something that you've worked through in the field, the same environment, the same context that the nationals are going to be doing. So that would be in contrast to simply trying to train. We see a lot of training methodologies on, in the missiological world, and then, but it's the actual practical application of those in the field where you learn, culture and, 1,000 different things that are really, really helpful when you're trying to relate to nationals. For me, it was not effective. I was not effective, but they were. But I still needed to be the exemplar that Paul may have been, for Timothy and others.
Thank you. Yeah, so some similar comments here as well. Sorry, Edward, go ahead.
To cite an example, a new location. I was formerly in the capital. Like I said, I'm a missionary in the Republic of Mali. I was in the capital before, but I'm now in another location that's almost 10 hours to the capital. When we got here, I'm just talking of something that look practical now. The water we are drinking, where we are coming from, is different from the water we met here. The water here look like a hard water. It means that if you put soap, it may not be soapy enough, but that is what the people on ground have been drinking. I'm just using a practical thing. Now, when we came in, it looked like we had a challenge of settling down, because in a completely new location, very hot, hotter than where we are coming from. Because if you check the rate of, if you check the map and check Africa, you see that Mali is the hottest country. But where we are is even more hotter than the capital. So when we got here, my wife was feeling maybe sick, the heart problem. She couldn't sleep. She has to take drug before sleeping because of the new environment completely. And it became a problem. But now, she now asked a question. The question is it the water that is the problem? I don't know what to say, because for me, I prefer we get used to the water. But she is saying that, no, we should go and be buying water. That's from another location now. The taste of the water from that location is different from our own, the distance. Now, the reason why I insisted that we should be taking the water the indigenous are taking, this is obedience. You call it obedience-based discipleship. This because if you are not taking their water, your body is not you are not used to their water. It is very difficult for you to visit them in their houses and they present the same water to you. It will create more problems. So I told her that I don't want to start what I cannot finish. The reason is because we are here to reach out to the people. And God knew that we are here, and God knew that we are here, and He gave them the water to be drinking. So if He has given them that water to be drinking, and they didn't die because of the water, I believe that the water will not kill us. So now what I'm simply saying is this. Like the last speaker said, the person that spoke last said, the contextualizing to the environment where we find ourselves, can the culture and the thing we see around will sometimes bring a sort of hindrances to obedience-based discipleship. Like what I've given a practical example, the water they are drinking, it seems that it's different from where we are coming from. And it seems it's causing an health challenge to my wife, according to her. Maybe that's what is causing the health challenge. Now, we cannot visit them going to their houses and they present that water to us and we say we are not going to drink. We are going to remain here. I don't know the years we will remain here. So, and we still just have to get used to the water. If not, if we start changing the water, the body immunity, from my experience as a missionary for the past 20-something years, my body will get used to it and eventually I will cooperate. But if we don't drink the water, our obedience in our base discipleship will be affected. I think that's just a practical thing I want to cite out.
Thank you.
Okay, so actually, Renata, you just posted pathways of growth. I find the term helpful, but it could be added which kind of growth we're talking about. And so great statement, great question. I'm going to turn it back over to Daniel now. Daniel has some recommendations going forward from this study, and go ahead and share those with us.
Okay. Hopefully everything's going through. I know the internet seems a little bit fuzzy right now. Hopefully you can hear okay. We've covered a lot of material very quickly, hopefully not too fast. But I encourage you to download the research report. The link for it was in the email that you received to invite you to this. If you need it again, feel free to contact one of us and we can make sure you get it, okay? I'm sure, considering the group of people that are here, that a lot of this material is not new to you. We didn't expect it to surprise you because we drew it from you, if you will. But the difference is we can say these things now, not from my personal experience or from one person's personal experience. We can say this from rigorous research with movement catalysts in different parts of the world on different continents, that these are the things we found. So being research-based gives, I think, a lot more strength to making statements related to these things than when we do from our own experience. That's one of the reasons I like research-based training. You can have confidence talking about this because it's not just your experience, it's not just in your part of the world. These things that we've talked about have come from many different continents and from people in different experiences. So go to the next one, if you will, there. We talked about on formative factors. We talked about challenging assignments and developmental relationships. Those two categories dominated 80% of the interviews. Therefore, these two are obviously key to catalyst development. So I would say that we need to think about how we leverage, how we maximize challenging assignments and developmental relationships. For one of the things I thought about when looking at this, just based on my own personal experience, is that we don't think a lot about assignments being something that grows the missionary. We think more of sending them there to be a catalyst for something to change, which is definitely what they're there to do. But we need to also think about them when we place them somewhere. It's for also God's going to use that for their development, and we need to balance that with. While the focus is certainly on what we're there to do, we also need to make sure that we're helping people grow and develop because of where they're located. And now back to growth pathways, just as we finish up, the only thing I'll say is this. I encourage all of us to be more aware of growth pathways and the concept, if you find it helpful, both in your own life and in the lives of the people that you're helping. I believe it helps to understand the primary way in which someone is growing and developing in ministry, to feed into that and leverage it. If the primary way that someone's growing is from reflection, then if I'm working with that person, I want to help them. I want to make sure that the really important things they're feeding into that way, into taking time to reflect on it. Okay, using it to leverage what God's doing in someone's life. Now, we're going to do more work on growth pathways in the future. We've got one of our team members working on that right now. I don't know when that'll be available, but he's developing that more out of the interview. So it'll be nice when that comes out, something that we'll publish. And that also reminds me that be aware and be looking for articles. We have several article ideas. Some are even partially written that we're going to be trying to put place in missiological journals over the next several months. And so each one hopefully giving a little bit different perspective on what you've heard today. With that said, Jamie, I just think get you to wrap it up for us. I think we're done with
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel and Paul. And I just want to say it's just a joy to have each one of you on the webinar today. I think that I'm just tremendously blessed by the wisdom that is represented all across this Teams room today, all across the world from wherever you're joining. It's really neat how this takes on a life of its own and becomes a learning community where we're learning from one another. And so just want to thank everyone for your contributions. And let's just go ahead and close with a word of prayer here. And I'm going to ask Matt Harbour, who is one of the board members for Bethany, to just close us today.
And let's pray. Lord, I just thank you so much for this opportunity, brothers and sisters who are deeply concerned with your gospel and making disciples. Glory, the opportunity for us to come together, listen to findings as we consider work that we're engaged in all around the world. Lord, I pray that the ideas talked about here bear fruit in each ministry represented, in each personal life represented, Lord, that we ourselves come to know more and more how to become more like you so that we can draw others to you. Lord, thank you for the ministry of Bethany and the hard work that Paul and everyone else has done. Project, pray blessing as we wrap up this meeting, wherever we are in the world, that you'd go before us and lead us into how we see more and more today. Amen.
All right. Thank you all. Great to see you.
Thank
Have a
you.
blessed week.
Thank you.
Good to see
Thank you.
everyone.
All right.